The Panama Canal stands as one of the great engineering marvels of the modern world. Since its opening, it has enabled the passage of more than 1 million ships between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, facilitating the transport of goods worth over $4 trillion. This vital artery of global commerce has been a significant boon to the American economy. Recently, however, Elon Musk has raised concerns about the canal's current state, expressing disbelief over what has transpired there. Historically, the Panama Canal has served as a crucial trade route. Once under the control of the United States, the canal was handed over to Panama in 1999. Since then, it has faced a series of challenges, particularly regarding rising usage fees. These costs have escalated to such an extent that former President Donald Trump threatened to seize control of the canal if the tolls were not lowered. So, what exactly happened to this once revered trade route, and why is it now the subject of frustration among American shipping companies? More importantly, why has it caught Elon Musk's attention? Let's delve into what has brought the Panama Canal back into the spotlight. On December 22, during a rally in Arizona, President-elect Donald Trump made headlines with a bold and unexpected statement. Addressing the Panamanian authorities directly, Trump criticized the high tolls being charged to American ships using the canal. He argued that these excessive fees hinder the efficient movement of goods between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, ultimately harming U.S. businesses. According to Trump, these economic pressures contribute to the broader struggles of the American economy. He warned that if the tolls weren't reduced, the U.S. would demand the return of the Panama Canal to bring shipping costs back under control. Trump suggested that the canal's high usage fees may be benefiting foreign powers, particularly China, at the expense of the United States. His comments took many by surprise, sparking immediate international reactions. In a swift and firm response, Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino rejected Trump's accusations, asserting Panama's full control over the canal. Mulino clarified that his country was not granting China any special advantages and had no intention of returning the canal to U.S. hands. He made it clear there would be no negotiations on the matter, signaling Panama's firm stance on its sovereignty. Elon Musk, who has become increasingly vocal on matters of infrastructure and government spending, weighed in with his own perspective. According to inside sources, Musk believes Panama's high tolls are the result of a complex mix of issues, including water shortages, security concerns, political instability, and the high cost of maintenance. He speculates that Panama might be compensating for these challenges by charging American shipping companies more. Musk's commentary has added another layer to the debate, highlighting the economic and logistical pressures that surround one of the world's most vital trade routes. While Trump's remarks were praised by some of his supporters as a show of strength, others viewed them as a threat to another nation's sovereignty. President Mulino's strong rebuttal underscores the tension and long-standing history surrounding the canal, a history that stretches back over 500 years. To fully understand the roots of the Panama Canal, we must return to the early 16th century. In 1513, Spanish explorer Vasco Núñez de Balboa became the first European to cross the Isthmus of Panama. He discovered a narrow strip of land separating the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and envisioned a waterway that could link them. This idea captivated the imagination of many explorers, as it promised a safer and faster route between Europe and Asia. The alternative, the treacherous voyage around Cape Horn at the southern tip of South America, was notoriously dangerous. Survivors of that journey often recounted horrifying storms and mythical sea monsters. Despite widespread interest, efforts to build a canal stalled for centuries due to technological limitations and the formidable Panamanian terrain. Dense jungles, mountainous regions, and a sweltering tropical climate made the area nearly impassable for early explorers and engineers. It wasn't until the late 19th century that serious efforts resumed. In 1881, more than 300 years after Balboa's discovery, French engineers, fresh off their successful completion of the Suez Canal, set their sights on Panama. Equipped with improved technology and high hopes, they began work on a sea-level canal under the leadership of famed French diplomat and developer Ferdinand de Lesseps. However, the challenges they faced would soon prove greater than anticipated. Ferdinand de Lesseps, riding high on the recent success of constructing the Suez Canal, believed that replicating that achievement in Panama would be relatively straightforward. Many shared his optimism. However, they were quickly proven wrong. Almost immediately after construction began, workers began falling ill, stricken by tropical diseases such as malaria and yellow fever. Within days, the workforce was in crisis, and over the following weeks, many succumbed to the illnesses. It became painfully clear that Ferdinand and his team had severely underestimated the harsh and unforgiving environment of Panama. Unlike the arid, manageable terrain of the Egyptian desert, Panama's thick jungles, unpredictable topography, and relentless tropical rains posed enormous challenges. Frequent landslides, dense vegetation, and an overwhelming mosquito population made the site nearly impossible to manage. The mosquitoes, in particular, were efficient carriers of disease, decimating the workforce and stalling progress. On top of that, the land's uneven and rugged nature made digging infinitely more difficult than anything attempted during the Suez project. The escalating challenges came with skyrocketing costs. As expenses piled up year after year, the feasibility of the project came into question. Corruption within the leadership only made matters worse, draining resources and sowing confusion among the teams. By 1889, just 8 years after the project began, over 20,000 workers had died, massive sums of money were lost, and the dream of a canal connecting the two oceans seemed shattered. With morale and funding depleted, the French ultimately abandoned the project in December of that year, leaving behind a failure of historic proportions. Yet, less than 2 decades later, the United States decided to take up the challenge. Under the leadership of President Theodore Roosevelt, the U.S. recognized the strategic value of the Panama Canal, not only for commerce but also for military operations. A canal would offer a significantly faster route for naval fleets and commercial ships between the Atlantic and Pacific. However, there was a major obstacle: the canal zone was not under U.S. jurisdiction. At that time, Panama was still part of Colombia, and tensions were rising as Panamanians sought independence. Seeing an opportunity, the U.S. backed Panama's independence movement in 1903. In exchange for American support, Panama agreed to sign a treaty granting the U.S. control over the canal zone, along with rights to build and manage the waterway. The treaty was signed that same year, and construction officially resumed in 1904 under the guidance of American civil engineer John Stevens. Stevens, known for his sharp management skills and calm demeanor under pressure, was the ideal choice to lead the renewed effort. Unlike his French predecessors, he prioritized the health and well-being of his workers. Before construction resumed, Stevens established improved housing, sanitation facilities, and medical support for the labor force. He also brought in top military doctors to combat the spread of disease, particularly malaria and yellow fever. One of Stevens' most important decisions was to abandon the idea of a sea-level canal, which had proven impossible for the French. Instead, he opted for a lock-based system that would lift ships to higher elevations and lower them back down on the other side. This innovative solution allowed engineers to work with Panama's rugged terrain rather than against it, cutting costs and reducing the need for large-scale excavation of mountains and hills. By 1906, substantial progress had been made, and optimism began to return, but so did the problems. Late that year, tensions flared between President Roosevelt and Stevens. Initially, the administration had been supportive, providing resources and political backing for the project. But now, conflicting priorities and bureaucratic interference began to disrupt the work. Some accounts suggest that Roosevelt's administration was pressuring Stevens to hire a contractor he didn't trust, while others hint at deeper disagreements about the direction of the project. The U.S. president never fully supported John Stevens' later decisions on the canal project, and over time, it became increasingly clear that the government was looking for an opportunity to replace him. That opportunity arrived when Stevens, overwhelmed by the stress of managing the colossal undertaking, fell ill. However, before he could be officially removed, Stevens made the decision himself. He resigned publicly and stepped down from his role in 1907. He passed the mantle of chief engineer to George Washington Goethals, a U.S. Army officer and experienced engineer. Contrary to expectations, Goethals didn't radically reinvent the project, he simply continued what Stevens had started, pushing forward with greater intensity. Using advanced steam shovels and controlled explosions with dynamite, his team tackled the formidable task of excavating the Culebra Cut, one of the most technically difficult portions of the canal. Despite new methods and equipment, the challenges remained immense. Machinery frequently broke down, and the terrain continued to resist transformation. Even with the improved health and sanitation systems initiated by Stevens and expanded by Goethals, nearly 5,000 workers lost their lives to yellow fever, accidents, landslides, and hazardous weather. The environmental difficulties were relentless. Heavy rains triggered mudslides that would refill areas that had just been excavated, forcing workers to redo weeks of labor overnight. Still, Goethals and his team pressed forward with determination. Their perseverance paid off. After more than a decade of setbacks, sacrifice, and progress, the dream finally became reality. On August 15, 1914, the Panama Canal officially opened with the passage of the SS Ancon, the first ship to traverse the completed waterway. It was a historic moment, not only for the United States and Panama, but for global commerce. The difference it made was monumental. Before the canal, it took nearly 2 months for ships to travel between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Now, with the canal in place, that same journey could be completed in just 8 hours. It revolutionized global shipping and military logistics. The project's success was made possible by the hard work of laborers from across the world, including many experienced workers from the Caribbean. The United States had succeeded where others had failed, establishing a crucial route for both trade and military operations. But the question remained, how long would they control it? From the moment it opened, the Panama Canal was owned and operated by the United States, and their control extended beyond the canal itself to the entire surrounding canal zone. President Roosevelt had rightly viewed the region as a key strategic asset, especially with the onset of World War I. During the war, the canal was used primarily to transport American military supplies, reinforcing the canal's geopolitical significance. Even after the war ended, the U.S. maintained control, modifying the infrastructure to support increasingly large ships, though massive vessels like the Seawise Giant ultimately proved too large for passage. The canal became a vital commercial artery, and ship traffic soared. Though Panama benefited financially through compensation agreements, the control of its territory remained in American hands for nearly half a century. This colonial-style arrangement bred resentment and nationalism, especially under the leadership of Panamanian President Omar Torrijos. Torrijos, deeply committed to his country's sovereignty, was determined to terminate the Hay-Abunavarilla Treaty, the agreement that had granted the U.S. ownership of the canal in exchange for financial support. He and his government demanded full Panamanian control over all of their national territory, including the canal built by the U.S. From the late 1960s into the 1970s, Torrijos began diplomatic efforts to renegotiate the terms with U.S. President Richard Nixon. Though negotiations were tense and often contentious, they eventually bore fruit. In 1977, the Torrijos-Carter treaties were signed, marking a historic shift in canal governance. These treaties gradually increased Panama's legal rights and administrative control over the canal. Over the next 2 decades, this transition continued until December 31, 1999, when Panama assumed full control and sovereignty over the entire canal zone. Yet, even with full ownership, tensions would continue to rise in the years that followed, especially over disputes involving usage fees and geopolitical influence. How the United States would respond in the face of this shifting power dynamic remained to be seen, especially under future leaders like Donald. After gaining full control of the Panama Canal, the Panamanian government quickly asserted its sovereignty by implementing a significant change, increasing the fees for all ships using the route. This affected every shipping company, including major American firms like Maersk Line and COSCO Shipping, both crucial to the U.S. economy. The tolls, nearly doubled in some cases depending on cargo size, drew widespread criticism. Still, Panama stood firm, justifying the price hikes as necessary to fund ongoing maintenance and future upgrades to accommodate more and larger vessels. Although initially resistant, most shipping companies eventually adjusted to the new fees. However, toll increases continued well into the mid-2010s, with costs escalating year after year. By that point, tensions had reached a breaking point. Several companies began entering into private negotiations with the Panama Canal Authority in hopes of securing more favorable terms. Despite these discussions, the authority announced yet another significant toll increase in early 2016, prompting further backlash from the international shipping community, particularly within the United States. The Canal Authority defended the decision, stating the funds were essential to complete its long-planned expansion project, aimed at enhancing capacity. True to its word, the expansion was completed by the end of 2016, but toll prices remained elevated. Rather than stabilizing after the project, fees continued to climb through the early 2020s. For instance, in 2023, all ships under 65 feet in length were hit with more than a 10% fee increase, with projections estimating a near 30% rise by 2025. Many observers began drawing comparisons to the period when the US managed the canal, pointing out that fees remained stable for nearly 40 years until Panama gradually assumed control in the 1970s. This growing dissatisfaction led to a dramatic political moment when former US President Donald Trump publicly criticized Panama's handling of the canal. Trump accused the Panamanian government of overcharging American shipping firms and even went so far as to threaten reclaiming control of the waterway if the practices didn't change. Escalating the rhetoric, he also alleged that Panama might be favoring Chinese interests, suggesting undue influence from Beijing. The accusations did not sit well with Panamanian officials. President José Raúl Mulino responded firmly, defending his country's sovereign ownership of the canal and insisting that it remained free from foreign interference. He emphasized that Panama had no intention of renegotiating control or allowing any external influence, be it from the US or elsewhere. Addressing the issue of rising toll fees, President Mulino explained that prices were set by industry experts based on operational costs and market dynamics, ensuring the canal's financial sustainability. Given the economic implications, it wasn't long before Elon Musk entered the conversation. As head of the Department of Government Efficiency, Musk was tasked with investigating the effectiveness of key global operations impacting the US. After reviewing the situation, he weighed in on Panama's toll strategy and the broader challenges facing the canal. Musk pointed out that the current issues extended beyond pricing. Compared to the 1960s, the Panama Canal has been facing increasingly severe droughts and water shortages, making it harder for large vessels to pass through. The situation worsened dramatically in 2019 when the dry season lasted far longer than anticipated, with minimal rainfall. With climate patterns growing more extreme and dry seasons expected to intensify, the Panama Canal Authority had no choice but to rethink its operational model. One of their major adaptations involved reducing the amount of water used with each passing ship, a decision driven as much by environmental necessity as by economics. After years of drought-driven water shortages, the Panama Canal Authority adopted water-saving transit procedures that lengthen each crossing. Although the canal can still operate, slower passages place extra strain on the century-old lock gates, accelerating wear and pushing maintenance costs ever higher. Financial pressures have only mounted since the 2020 pandemic. Global lockdowns closed factories, slashed trade volumes, and left thousands of containers stranded. For years later, traffic and revenue have not fully recovered, and the authority is signaling yet another round of toll hikes to offset the shortfall. With more than 20 large tankers, many carrying vital oil and gas cargo, still queuing for the canal each day, energy security worries are rising as well. Influential governments and corporations are already maneuvering for leverage as the waterway's capacity shrinks. Elon Musk argues that these compounding problems point to a single conclusion: the canal must be future-proofed. More than half of its core infrastructure is over a century old, and the post-2016 expansions merely postponed an inevitable reckoning. A comprehensive rebuild would cost billions and, if financed through even higher tolls, could simply drive shipping lines elsewhere. Worse, a true overhaul would require a prolonged shutdown, echoing the decade-long construction period that ended in 1914 even with today's advanced technology. Musk's assessment surprised many observers, because it implicitly supports Panama's rationale for steep tolls, something former President Donald Trump has fiercely condemned. Trump, who previewed an aggressive stance during his December 22 Arizona rally, insists the overcharges unfairly burden U.S. shippers and hint at pro-China favoritism. He has threatened to take back the canal or force new negotiations if Panama refuses to roll back fees. Whether this is a genuine policy blueprint or political theater remains unclear. Trump's inauguration on January 20 looms large, and global trade partners are watching to see if Washington will push hard for revamped accords, or if the rhetoric will fade once the realities of canal economics set in. What do you think? Is a U.S. bid to reclaim influence over the Panama Canal on the horizon, or is this just another headline-grabbing skirmish? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this breakdown, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Check out the next video on your screen, you won't want to miss it.